You're listening to On Mission with Dr. Matt Davis, a podcast designed to explore the personal mission of everyday leaders. Hear from men and women who are making a difference in their corner of the world and discover what keeps them on mission. Welcome to On Mission. I am Dr. Matt Davis, and our guest today is Chaplain Scott Nupson. Scott is a retired chaplain and represents the Associated Gospel Churches Chaplaincy program. He pastored in Minnesota for 6 years before joining the Air Force as a chaplain. Scott and his wife, Ellen, currently live in La Plata. Am I saying that right? La Plata, all right, Maryland. And 3 of their 4 children are Maranatha grads. Yeah, so absolutely. We won't mention the black sheep. I don't know which one that was. The oldest. They enjoy taking a country drive, walking through the woods, golfing, and playing table games with family and friends. Scott's favorite meal is a nice juicy steak and baked potato. That goes right up on the scoreboard, I think. That's been the most frequent of all of our guests, is a juicy steak and a baked potato. His favorite sports team is any team that beats the Packers, and so I can identify with that very strongly. He has been a Vikings and a Twins fan since he is from Minnesota, and so we will cut him some slack for that. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Dr. Davis. Appreciate that.
So how's the golf game going?
Well, I only play like once or twice or 3 or 4 times a year, so not very often. So
that's the killer, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's how it's going.
It's always about consistency, and right. Even a bad day of golf is still a great day.
Oh, it's beautiful weather like this to get out, and my wife Ellen likes to golf too, and my daughter Kelly came home from Guam this summer, and we got to play a few rounds of golf. And
I bet they're expensive golf courses in Guam, probably.
They probably are.
Yeah.
Unless you're military and you can be on the military installation, then you can't beat it.
Oh, that'd be a beautiful thing. Yeah, I got the chance to play on Saturday and took my dad out, and we had a great time. We played so well, we just left the scorecard on the cart and drove away. Like, leave it there. Don't ever speak of this again.
Well, I thought you were trying to show it off.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, that's what it was. No, we had fun. But, it's amazing. You could hit the ball somewhere between, let's just say, 75 and 100 times. And if there was 1 or 2 really great shots in there, you'll be back.
Yes, that's what keeps you going.
Yeah.
Yes.
So love the game, but it can be expensive. It can be frustrating. My wife rope-a-doped me into thinking that we'd be playing golf. She bought a set of clubs when we were dating, and I thought, she's going to really love this. We went out a couple of times. Since we have been married, I think I could count on one finger the number of times that we've gone out golfing. And she said, well, it's just too expensive when both of us play. Yeah. And she's been playing that card ever since.
Oh, boy. Yeah. That's why we don't play a whole lot. But my wife and I our first date was to the driving range. I had an accident when I drove a semi-truck years ago, and I broke every bone in my face, and I was out for the summer. And my brother-in-law, Larry Johnson, who pastors at Grace Baptist in Mankato, Minnesota, he said, why don't you play golf? Because I couldn't play basketball. I was only 22 years old, and, I couldn't do any physical sports. So I went out and started picking that up. And so I invited my wife, and she drives it straight as an arrow every time. It just doesn't go as far as I can hit it, but mine goes left, go right. I'm always looking for it in the woods
someplace. Short and straight will beat long and in the woods every time.
Every time.
I know, but I still pull out the driver. I don't care. That's right. I tell my dad, I didn't come here to lay up. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Oh, man, that's for sure. Well, I am really excited about the opportunity to talk to you on the podcast here today and to hear some of the perspectives that you have after all these years in ministry.
Yeah.
You must have some incredible stories. I mean, you just drop off like it's nothing, that you broke every bone in your face. Like, what? That had to be quite an experience. So I don't know at what point in life that happened, but they've done well. I mean, the reconstruction was pretty good. You're a good-looking guy, if I could say that. A lot of times, plastic surgeons did well.
I used to, when Mike Pence was the vice president, people would always say, "Hey, you look like Mike Pence."
Yeah.
But I broke some more bones in my face in 2019 riding my bicycle. I fell off and landed on my face. So my wife says I'm a klutz, but
your face is
I'm starting to believe it.
Oh my goodness. Well, I don't know what you would have looked like under normal circumstances, but the surgeons did a good job.
Well, I'm grateful for your support with that.
Well, most of us just have to go with what God gave us. You had the opportunity to upgrade.
Plastic surgery didn't always work.
Silver lining. So it's called the On Mission podcast for a reason. We ask our guests this big question kind of to start things off. Yeah. What is your mission in life?
Well, a mission statement for me, I don't have a defined one that's, here's my paragraph, here's what's written out exactly, but the Westminster Confession of Faith says, the greatest aim of man is to glorify God, right, and to enjoy him forever. And so there's a scripture verse in the Bible that talks also about, therefore, whatever you eat or drink, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. And so that's my goal in life. That's my mission. So no matter what area of my life that it affects, whether it's being a dad, I want to be the best dad I can be. A grandpa now. We have 2 grandkids that live in South Korea. So we don't get to see them very often, but it's a challenge. But I want to be that grandfather. I want to be a father. I want to still continue to be that shining light to them, what a Christian looks like, what a godly relationship looks like, one that pursues hard after God, one that loves the Lord with all of heart, soul, and mind. I fail at it far too often. We heard that this morning but in the chapel. But I'm still thankful for that opportunity to do that. And so then that relates down into being a chaplain or being a pastor or being a good neighbor. I want to do it every aspect of life. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned having grandkids on the other side of the world.
Yes, sir.
And that's got to be difficult.
Yeah.
But again, it's an acknowledgement that God is in control.
Right.
That God is doing something bigger than just us. But there'd be a lot of, say, grandparents, parents usually influencing on their own kids that are now adults and married. And they would say, we really want you to stay here so that we can be around. And that's not a bad instinct or desire to have that kind of influence. But you guys have had to kind of give that up.
Right.
And I'm sure that wasn't easy.
Yes, sir.
But how could something like that glorify God? Like we all say we want to glorify God with our life, but this is like down in the nitty gritty of a life decision how I'm going to actually approach this life question and maybe even look at it like from an earthly standpoint, I'm giving up the convenience of having grandkids around the corner, or at least even here in the country.
Right. In fact, we're on our clock, on our wall, we have 5 clocks. They're all different time zones where our family lives. So we only have one of our 4 children who lives in the States, and she lives in Madison, Kristen. Yeah. But Kyle lives in South Korea, just moved there from Hawaii. Before that, they were in Germany. He's an intel officer in the Air Force. He runs the intel shop there at Osan Air Base.
Pretty important job.
Yes, sir. And he enjoys it. And they're always involved in different ministry opportunities. My daughter, Kelly, is teaching at Harvest Christian in Guam. She's been there for 6-7 years now and loves it, and the impact that she makes on kids. That helps me to see and understand that glory to God that I'm grateful for, that we can do with our lives as a family unit. A daughter who just married a Brit lives in London and involved in church. He was going to a Wilberforce's church, one of the churches that he was right in her neighborhood there in Brixton. So, but that impact that you can go around the world and see them heavily involved in their local churches, in their ministry places, reaching out to others, it's a blessing.
For your family to be that widely distributed, because even the one living in Madison doesn't exactly live in your backyard.
No.
You must have raised them to be independent, to be resilient, to be creative and resourceful, but also with their own sense to pursue God's will for them and not necessarily just the comfort or support of family, as wonderful as that is.
Yeah.
Was that something you did intentionally?
Well, no, it just happens to go that way. They head off to college, and when a military kid grows up in the military, they're used to being independent. They're used to going places alone. They're used to having to find out how they're going to get someplace and plan their trip and get on a train in some country that they've never been in before to get transportation to the airport or something. So they get used to that. Or they go off to college. We were only at Maranatha all the times my 3 kids were students here. I think I could count maybe 3 or 4 times total in all those years, but we just couldn't make that trip and busy or deployed or gone or someplace. So they had to learn how to be pretty independent, and that God uses that in many ways. For instance, Kelly in Guam, 7 years. She comes home through the summer, but to have that opportunity, and our daughter Kristen, heavily involved in her church and serving the Lord, and right here in Madison, but they're so used to that. And
trust me, that's more of a mission field than anywhere else your kids
Madison. Yes. Oh boy.
There are 2 cities probably in the country that are maybe slightly more, we'll say, leftist, maybe Seattle and maybe Washington, D.C. But other than that, Madison would be like the hub.
And Kristen wants us to move here. We're actively pursuing.
Really?
Well, we only have 1 kid left in the States.
You might as well be next to her and experience what that might be like in retirement, right? And you're traveling all over now, right? You're representing a sending agency, or what do they call it? Endorsing agency,
right. So to be a chaplain in the military or the VA or the hospital or hospice or prison, fire, police, you have to have an endorsing agency. And so I support I belong to the Associated Gospel Churches Chaplaincy, which endorses chaplains, pastors in uniform in the military sense, limited access institutions. Some of the amazing opportunities I've had have been priceless. But you have to do a little traveling. I was at Bob Jones a couple weeks ago, and on the way to Central Seminary up in Minneapolis.
Hopefully you got out before.
I left a day early. We're supposed to get 5 inches on that Thursday, and I thought the traffic might be a little bit hard for that, so I left, and they ended up with a foot of rain.
Oh my goodness.
12 inches, and just north of there.
We're used to measuring our precipitation in inches here as well, but it's
always
frozen. That's a lot more rain. If that was snow, that'd be many feet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're certainly praying for them as they try and get things put back together from that. Yeah. And that was probably minor compared to what a lot of Americans are digging out from. And really, it's been a lot of military National Guard units that are called upon in moments of crisis, and chaplains are always part of that effort, aren't they?
Yeah. When there's things going on, chaplains are there. I was on the watch floor as things were being pulled out of National Security Agency, as we were pulling out of Afghanistan, ministering to the folks that were watching that in real time. Had opportunity after opportunity to minister to people who have been in harm's way, in dangerous places, who suffer through some of the results of being in those places as well. But the opportunity to share Christ and the hope of the gospel and how it changes, transforms, it fixes, it heals people, and what a blessing that's been all these years.
Well, let me ask you a little bit about the chaplaincy as a ministry opportunity, because people are familiar with pastors,
right?
And they might be familiar with maybe a local police chaplain or a pastor that serves as the police chaplain,
right?
But there might be a little mystery about what is a military chaplain. What do they have the freedom to do? Sometimes they're portrayed as these kind of milquetoast pacifists that will say or do anything in any religion. You know, they just sort of take the collar off and put the next outfit on and do a different kind of service. And frankly, that wouldn't have a lot of appeal to someone who knows God's word and wouldn't be interested in performing a different type of service.
Yes, sir.
That would almost be like a major compromise of our values. And so I want you to take a minute to kind of demystify the role of a military chaplain And you've used maybe a term of art there that you minister to them.
Right.
And I don't know that everybody would really know what you mean by that.
Sure. So I explored the chaplaincy a lot. That's what I thought. You had to be a compromiser to become a chaplain.
Yeah,
I heard that over the years. You got to compromise your faith. One of my friends, Steve Siefkes, he retired. He went to Pillsbury and then up to Central. And then he showed up in seminary one day wearing his uniform and like, hey, I could be a chaplain as well. And so I didn't meet the qualifications then, but a few years later I got a mass mailing and said, hey, you want to be a chaplain? So I called Steve, talked with him at length about things. I set up a couple visits to the military bases, talked with some chaplains there. And one of the chapel places I went to, since we're in Minnesota, Grand Forks was pretty close. I was interested in being an Air Force chaplain. And there was one of the major command chaplains was there. Afterwards, I talked with him, and he said, I don't want you to come in unless you want to lead people to Jesus Christ.
Oh, well, that doesn't sound too compromising.
No. So it was an amazing thing. It was like, okay, God. My recruiter, when I talked to the recruiter, there was an enlisted man that helped me through the process of the paperwork. He was playing Christian music when I walked in the office, and I thought, oh, good. The recruiter's at it again, doing whatever it takes, to try to get you, And,
like he researched you and figured he'd play something you'd like.
But this guy actually came to Christ a year prior to that time. And he was so excited about his relationship with the Lord that exuded out of every aspect of him. And he was in the military working. And so I was so excited about that. And so things like that helped me cement that. And I found that to be the case. Yes, there's times when there's some battles, some issues that you have to deal with, but you have God's power and strength to be firm, and you're wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. You don't have to go around saying, hey, I don't do that, I don't do this, I don't. But there's a chance that they can't tell you what to preach or teach. So share the gospel.
As I understand it, there's kind of three aspects to the qualification side, where on the first level, really before you even become a chaplain or maybe you can enter the service, but to be granted that status as a military chaplain, you have to have a Master of Divinity.
Right.
And so you are going to be theologically trained by a seminary.
Right.
And in your case, was that Central Seminary?
Yep.
And so you already had your Master of Divinity. You worked on that. Then you have to join in with a qualified endorsing agency.
That's correct.
Which is what you now work with.
Right.
And there are only so many of those.
Right.
And each of those would be, how do I say this, in a particular denomination, although we don't specifically refer to Independent Baptists as a denomination, but for military purposes.
Right. Yes, sir.
So you now have an endorsing agency, and then the military has its own chaplaincy training program.
That's correct.
So that's not going to be the theological training, and it's not going to be the denominational affiliation. It's the other piece, like getting acclimated to the military, the chain of command, the role of the chaplain, and all of that kind of thing, right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I consider myself to be a missionary. And just like anybody in the normal community, work with people from different faith backgrounds or different backgrounds in general, we did that in the military, right? And the minute somebody would deny me the opportunity to be a chaplain, I would try to deny somebody else, then they could deny me that opportunity as well. So you work with that, you work in those situations, have a lot of good conversations, even with the chaplains, theological discussions with the chaplains you work with. There's many people come from evangelical backgrounds, and so many who know Christ and want to serve the Lord, and so we're grateful for that and that connection that you can have. That, but oftentimes,
these days there's a whole lot of other faith backgrounds,
right?
Even non-traditional, non-Western type religions.
And I've talked with chaplains. I asked them point blank. You don't have the basics down in a walk with God. Why do you want to be a chaplain? Why do you consider that? I'm knowing chaplains that even claim to be a Christian and followers of Christ are more interested in the social drinking, smoking cigars aspect of things rather than preaching and teaching and leading Bible studies and So there are those aspects. So it's temptation is there for some that have gone astray, but most chaplains that love the Lord are pretty strong in that.
So you're in it, glorify God,
right?
Lead guys to Christ,
right?
You have the truth,
right?
So there's that part of it.
Yeah.
But some might ask, what is the military's interest itself in hiring, training, feeding, housing, deploying chaplains? Because that would have to be, under our Constitution and values as a nation, that would have to be some sort of secular purpose, almost a non-religious purpose of having religious leaders employed by the government. And this has been challenged legally many times.
Absolutely.
But how would you articulate, or I guess reverse engineer from even your own experience, or what does the military say is their purpose for why they'd have chaplains?
Well, chaplains, of course, have been in the military since before the First Continental Army, or since the First Continental Army, before the nation was a nation. And so Paul Revere was riding to a church on the famous midnight ride, right?
Okay.
And the two lights in the tower, one for the British are coming, or two if they're by sea or land or whatever it is. But that church had a militia. The pastor had a militia in that church. He was a godly guy, and they were protecting some of the assets.
So they were
Samuel Adams, and
they were not pacifists. They were fighting preachers.
Absolutely, yes, sir. But George Washington then commissioned the very first chaplain. So we've been in there. So the constitutional longevity of having a chaplain protect the First Amendment rights of military members and their dependents are not always able in foreign locations or other places to have that opportunity to practice their faith. And so we're here to help support that.
So even in Congress, there's a statue of one of our founding fathers coming out of the church, taking off his church robes, and underneath he had the military uniform on.
Yes, sir.
And said, okay, now everybody sign up.
Yes, sir.
There we go. So there is definitely a blended tradition.
Absolutely.
Okay. So as we flash forward to today, the military says, all right, it's always been part of our tradition, but they must see still some value.
Yeah. So if you're a commander and you want your people to be healthy to serve, right? And so if you have somebody that's giving you problems, got all kinds of issues and struggles and things going around, like any sort of institution, even a church, a pastor deals 90% of his time with 10% of the people, right? And so that happens with any institution in a lot of ways. And so if you have healthy people when they're going through struggles or they don't make those wrong choices, it's all about mission accomplishment. I want to get the mission done if I have healthy people to get that done. So the commanders often use you in that sense for that goal, quite frankly.
And so it's almost like a mental health aspect,
right? Well,
is it?
Yeah, some way. So mental health is involved in the military quite heavily as well, and so our aspect though is the spiritual health of the individual. So we promote people.
Doesn't that strike you though as a little bit like anti the times? I mean, because right now there's not much secular recognition that there is such a thing as spiritual health.
I was the second chaplain at Defense Intelligence Agency just a few years ago, and some of the civilians that worked there, 60% of the new hires had no military affiliation. And so when we would give our briefing to the newcomers about here's what chaplains offer, some of them were like, we can't. Separation church and state. We can't have chaplains and military or religion and military. They don't mix. And we're like, yes, we do. And we have this longstanding tradition of here's why. So a lot of it is just educating them and helping them see and understand the value of chaplains in the military.
John Peter Gabriel Muhlenberger. That was the name of the pastor that did that, Muhlenberg. So, it's back from great state of Pennsylvania. Back in the day.
That's awesome.
So now
I remember that story.
Look that up. The architect of the Capitol has a great article and some pictures of that statue.
Well, that's neat.
We got a behind-the-scenes tour from Wall Builders,
Oh, yeah.
They do a phenomenal job
great.
of collecting the original artifacts and letters. And I don't go along with all their I think they're a little Christian Reconstructionist on some things. But for the most part, when you can see those original sources,
yes, sir.
because that's a part of our history that they're trying to memory hole.
Right.
You know, they would really rather do away with that.
They want to see it.
And what we see in the chaplaincy even today is that history is alive and well.
Yes, sir.
And it must be that they see some present value results from the work of the chaplains.
Yes, sir.
How do they measure that? Or how is it purely intangible? Or how does the chaplaincy continue to sort of assess its effectiveness in accomplishing that part of the mission?
Well, part of it is a big portion of our job is counseling.
Yeah.
All right. So I do biblical counseling. When somebody comes to me and they have a problem, and I listen to their problem, their issue, and I say basically, at the end, I'm sorry, I can't help you, and they look at me like, what? I said, no, I can't, but I know somebody who can. As I'm reaching for my Bible, and I pull that over, and I often go through the Romans Road. And be able to share Christ with that individual. I had a guy, I was a few years ago at Maxwell Air Force Base, and officer training school was there. A young captain came in and he said, hey, you don't remember me, do you? And I said, no. And he said, well, I was a herding chaplain when you were at Offutt Air Force Base, or airman. I was brand new to the military, and had some struggles and things, and I came in your office and you shared Christ with me.
Wow.
And he said, I didn't get saved that day, but a few weeks later, he came to Christ. So it's good to hear those stories. I can tell story after story. There's this young lady who I just saw her about a year ago now. I went to her office, just out visiting, engaging the units. You talk with people. That's when you hear the stories, hey, pray for me, my grandma just died. So we pray right there, right? And this lady, a young airman, she saw me, and I have her permission to share her story. But she just burst out in tears, just wailing and sobbing when she saw me. And I thought somebody had died, right? But after she sobbed for a few minutes straight, and she finally said through sobs, these are happy tears. She continued to sob, and when she was able to gain control, she said that a fellow airman had invited her to church about a month prior to that, where she professed faith in Christ. A couple weeks later, she was baptized, and that church was heavily involved in discipling her, and she was so happy what she had in Christ that it caused her to weep.
Wow.
When she saw me as a chaplain.
That's amazing. You, in ministry, we oftentimes have what I call privileged access to, or confidential access to people at their very low points of life. The high points also, but many times at very low points of life.
Yes, sir.
And that's true of any pastoral role.
Right.
But in the chaplaincy, I would guess that is almost to an extreme.
Yes, sir.
And what are some of the things that people are coming to talk to the chaplains about? Like, what's the range of issues that they would want to come and discuss with you?
It ranges. It has a full gamut of things, right? From spiritual Christian background to suicidal work issues. And that's what the commander's looking for. Okay, who's suicidal in my unit? Those sort of things. We can't divulge that, but we can help that person get to a better place. So chaplains have 100% confidentiality. In other words, we can't tell anyone. Even the commander or the general would come and say, "Chaplain, you got to tell me what they told you." And no, we can't.
You could tell the general no?
Yes, sir.
You're probably one of only a very handful. Maybe
only,
the JAG lawyer and you.
Only in certain situations,
okay.
Right? But it's a neat opportunity, though, to have that time, and people come to you
because without that, people may not want to feel comfortable to open up.
I was at a horse show in Oklahoma City where we lived, involved in Tinker Air Force Base. I got a phone call from the command post, patched me through to an individual, and I have his permission to share this as well. But he explained, and I didn't quite know who he was. He knew who I was from unit engagement, but he had a 3-page suicide note written, had a gun in his hand. He was ready to commit suicide. And I was able to share with him the hope of the gospel, right? And connected with him for the next couple of years through that time. But I was the last resort, and he remembered, hey, chaplains can't tell anybody. He thought he was going to be in trouble with something, et cetera, which he wasn't, but his thoughts at that time weren't stable. And so he thought the worst, and it caused him to want to commit suicide.
So you were almost like the last.
It can be, absolutely. Right. And that's why we often have clearances, right, and access to these vaults, even where people are working in highly classified, secure areas. And so we can talk with people and encourage them and see what their needs are. And oftentimes when you're out roaming around, your counseling load is based on that. So they're like, oh, I remember the chaplain. I met him. I think I could share my secret with him. And so they come see you, make an appointment with you.
When you are recruiting for chaplains now, what is the disposition that you're looking for? Not necessarily personality, because then lots of different personalities, but what is the disposition of someone who's going to be an effective chaplain over the long term? You've been a chaplain. You were a chaplain for 25 years.
Sir. Yeah.
That's more than you even had to. I mean, you stayed in 5 bonus years after you could have retired, I guess.
And I turned 62, and then they kicked me out. So I would have stayed into 30 if I could.
Okay, really? Well, okay. So that's my question: is how. What is that disposition for long-term success in that role?
Well, oftentimes the people that I run into as chaplains over the years that I find to be successful, number one, they have to love the Lord, right? That's their whole goal in life. They want to reach people. They want to help people. They want to point others to the gospel of Christ. And so that is so exciting to see people who are on fire for God. I've got to supervise many chaplain candidates come in, and they have so much fire and energy, and they want to serve the Lord, and they want to share Christ with a lost and hurting world. So that's the foundation with it. Number two, if they're married, their wife needs to have a calling for ministry. Well, just like that chaplain, right? So the spouse, the wife, needs to be called to ministry. It can be hard. The spouse can be left alone at times, be the only parent, and that's a struggle. But they need to be called, and so that's another aspect to be a successful chaplain. So they can't have all the problems going on at home as well. They're going to have problems and issues. You're human, right? But it's not going to be that same extent if you're called and your wife is called to ministry. So fully committed to the Christ, both you and your spouse fully committed to Christ. And then thirdly, being able to just go out and schmooze with people. I mean, just go bring out a conversation and talk with people, known chaplains who you go up to them, how you doing? Fine. And there's long pause, and so they're not able to carry on a conversation. They don't go out of their way. If they go up to somebody, they just stand there. And they don't expect that. Well, those people don't last as chaplains. They don't get promoted. Whatever.
It almost makes you wonder what they thought they were getting into.
Well, yes. They seem to have.
I want to be a chaplain. I just don't like people very much.
That's it. And you got to come out of your comfort zone sometimes and come up with different ways of being creative. So I like to tell jokes, or like to tell folks, like when I came on campus this morning, I spotted an albino Dalmatian. It was the least I could do, right? So I didn't really do that, but
I see what you did there. Oh man, your kids are all groaning right now.
Yes, that's right.
Dad,
the dad joke.
You have to go with that
joke? Yes.
I love doing that to my kids. Oh man. Well, okay. So chaplain, you talk about the wife, the family. It really is an all.
Yes,
the family
absolutely.
is engaged with this.
Yes.
Chaplains get deployed from time to time.
Right.
Does that happen to you over your career?
Yes. Yep. I had eye cancer. I think Ron Hamilton.
Yeah.
2010, I was diagnosed with eye cancer in my right eye. And so for the next several years, I didn't deploy. I was kind of pulled out of that deployment phase. So I didn't deploy as much as I probably could have. And I didn't go to Afghanistan, Iraq. I went to Jordan. I went to Honduras. I went to southern Philippines, Zamboanga. I think the Burnhams, Marcia and Gracia Burnham, he was killed in a rescue attempt. They're missionaries. They held captive down there. I was there, held a 1-year anniversary memorial service actually on the Eab Air Base down there. So where else? But a different place. I was deployed to Tampa-Stan. That's where I met Joe Willis, another chaplain. Tampa-Stan, of course, is short for Tampa, Florida, U.S. CENTCOM down there.
I know the 5 stands, and that ain't one of them. We were in Kyrgyzstan this last year. I learned all about the stands.
Yes, sir.
They look up to Kazakhstan. They look down to Uzbekistan.
Yes, sir.
And no one likes Tajikistan. I don't know why. All right, but for us, right. We just say the stands.
That's right.
And it's a pretty unruly part of the world for the most part. But,
right.
I lived in Clearwater, and we need to pray for them right now. They're getting battered by a hurricane even as we sit here. But
to go back with the family and the impact. So like my first deployment, my kids were small, right? And I could call home almost every night. We didn't have cell phones and things like that back then, or the social media things that we have. And so I could call home and my wife, you could hear the kids, let me talk with Dad, let me talk with Dad. They were fighting to do it. Yeah. After about a month, you could hear in the background, do I have to talk to Dad?
Oh, man, that's heartbreaking.
At first it was, but then you realize, normal. Yeah, and then, but, you have that joyful reunion, you come home, and but you also have to realize that the transition back in the family, you can't just walk back in where you were. It's a slow transition where I always call it like whatever base I'm on in the airframe, let's say F-16, when I'm talking with people coming back from deployment, and I talk with these pilots, and I tell them, the F-16 standard, and when it comes back, and they, no, F-16 rule, what are you talking about? And I tell them it's just 1 degree at a time. When you're flying, you don't just come to a dead stop and go the other direction unless you're in a helicopter, right? But but with an F-16, you have to turn 1 degree at a time to get back going the other direction. And same thing with coming home and having that opportunity to meld back into your family. I guess
that's probably a lot of what chaplains do, is help guys with reintegrating back in with family after being gone a long time.
Yes, sir.
Well, and for a wife, how hard is that? I mean, she's had to play both parts for the last year or so. Yeah. And now you're back in, and you think, what, you're just going to walk in here and start making decisions on your own?
Yes. I don't know. Maybe my wife wouldn't appreciate me sharing this, but after my first deployment, she grabbed me by the shirt collar, literally, and she said, Scott, you have been gone. And because I was just, like, I was never left, I just plugged right back in, and so there's a little learning curve for me, and so I tried to be a little bit more mindful of that after that, but
let's talk a little bit about the struggles that our military members face. I'm thankful in our country right now we continue, I think since, I'm going to go all the way back to the early 90s, Desert Storm, we have had, I think, a very good run in the last few decades of patriotism and support for our troops, which was not evident back in the Vietnam era.
Right.
And that was a very shameful time, I think, where Americans treated the troops horribly when they returned. I mean, these were young men that had been drafted. They didn't even get to choose to go. And they were called baby killers and just horrible things when they came back. Instead of being celebrated at the airports, they were jeered and protested. Right. And obviously the war itself was unpopular, and they were being associated with that. Since Desert Storm in 91, 92, and then Desert Shield, Shield, then Storm, and then we had all the way through with the Iraq War, Enduring Freedom, and all these different conflicts since then, I think we've had a good level of patriotism, and perhaps even a better lens put on the struggles of individual service members as well. But we continue to hear reports of service members coming back and taking their own lives at an alarming rate.
Right.
And those that are still able to come and recover some function, they do struggle to integrate back in based on not just the horrors of war and what they've had to do or be a part of, but just what are those psychological pressures and struggles that they have, and how can we as just rank and file Americans and even church members properly minister to and support our service members?
That's a good question. When I first came in 25 years ago, there's a lot more. That generation, you would ask them what their church background was, and they'd say Baptist. They couldn't spell Baptist. They may have never been to church, C&E crowd, but Christmas and Easter. But they said they were Baptist. And in our world today, we've turned that around a little bit. Even in the military training, master resiliency training often teaches you spirituality doesn't necessarily mean religious. So you can be spiritual and not religious at all. So whatever you find that place of comfort and hope, they figure if you walking your dog out in the woods gives you comfort, and that's your spiritual resiliency, that's where you get it. And I'm like, what happens when your dog dies, and what happens when you can't walk through the woods because of your injuries, or because of it's raining out or snowing out or something's going on? You have no place to turn. And that's always my training that I would give to the units was faith works. Previous chief of chaplains, Donnie Costin, who is now the president of Liberty University, has that's a program that he brought in back when he was the chief of chaplain called Faith Works, and it's especially for a Christian, a believer, how important it is to know Christ and to have that power of knowing where to turn and finding help and finding peace in the midst of the conflict of internal struggles. Central Baptist Theological Seminary, they have a chaplain going to speak at their conference this next week, their fall conference, and he's going to talk about moral injury and how you take those things personally. You're taught to preserve life, and all of a sudden you're killing people.
And your instincts are always to preserve life.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And the military has to degrade that instinct a bit and redirect it.
Absolutely.
Even with that, do they teach them higher purpose for this, or is it strictly deconstructing the individual and part of the unit and just do your job? I mean, because we're complex as humans, and you can't simply be a robot, a killing machine, or something horrible like that. Doesn't really translate back into civilian.
Right. And the different branches are a little different, of course, the different missions that they have. And so I've deployed with the other branches, and you see how, you got that sergeant, he's always talking, or she's always talking to their troops in a downward position, right? And you will listen to me. You will charge that hill if you have to. Yeah. So if they don't, it could be chaos.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying you're on the front line in the trench. And the sergeant says charge, and you say, well, what's the morally defensible argument for this? But at the same time, at some point in life, you wrestle with those things that you've been a part of or that you've done.
Right.
And to have a deeper understanding of the necessity of that, or what was the point of it.
Right.
I can certainly identify with our Afghanistan troops that would look back at everything they've done and the way that this administration has just given it all away.
Right.
And I would be very hopeless about that too.
Right.
I mean, what did I just do? What did I see buddies killed for, and why did I do all this?
Right. Our Associated Gospel Churches, we have some of our chaplains are writing articles and things, and Jason Skeens, Chaplain Jason Skeens, just wrote a nice article or a paper on moral injury, and it's well done from a biblical perspective, how we can help put that. So we have it on our website that a person can go in there and find the journal it's called, and it's a good resource.
So give some practical things that the church member at large can do for the service member, and really the service member's family, who shouldn't be forgotten in this as well.
Absolutely. Number one, pray. Yeah. I think that's an important thing, a vital thing. And ask those prayer requests. What can we do to pray for you? Associated Gospel Churches sends that out to their chaplains all the time, and once a week in their home office, they pray for several chaplains, and you get an email, hey, we prayed for you today, or what are your prayer concerns, because we're praying for you this coming week. And that is really huge, knowing that you have that network, and you got your home church, your church back home, thinking about you, praying for you. One of the churches that we were a part of was Heritage Baptist Church in Alabama, near Montgomery, and anyway, they sent me when I was deployed care packages. They sent me letters. They sent me emails, and I got all kinds of things. They lovingly called my wife and said, hey, how can we help you? Can we take the kids off your hands for just a little while? Or how can we take out for dinner or lunch, or
just the little things that,
yes,
that say
we're thinking about you.
We remember you. We're thinking about you.
Right.
Yeah.
And that takes work. It takes effort, and people are busy and they forget. And any church member who's going through a struggle or a problem, we need to watch out for them, the family that we have, that we connect with, and it's no different within the military.
It really isn't super different, is it? It's if we're about doing what God's called the church to do for centuries, then we'll do well for our service members as well.
I was at Bob Jones, and a young lady was just got a box out of the mailroom. And it was a big box. It was packed with all sorts of goodies and drinks and all that kind of stuff. And it came from her home church.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a huge
care package goes a long ways, doesn't it?
Does. She was so excited. If you could just see that excitement, like, wow.
I have seen it regularly.
I bet you see it here.
When you see the kids coming out of the post office with those boxes, you hope it's not textbooks. Is that a care package?
That's right.
You can tell by the expression on their face usually what that is.
Absolutely.
So that's probably a good segue, just in closing, to talk about the role of the colleges. You mentioned being at BJ. I think you said you were a Pillsbury graduate.
Right.
You've had 3 kids now come to Maranatha. What is it about? Obviously, you have a trust factor there, and see that as those as key partners.
Right.
What would you say to perhaps a prospective parent, maybe, who's thinking about options for their young person, as to how they ought to approach that in prioritizing really a Christian college option over maybe some of the other things that they're considering?
That's huge. So when Kyle, my oldest, was here, he was in the choir, and they went over to Beaver Creek and they sang over there. And I don't know who was the speaker that night, but did an excellent job telling about the advantages about going to a Christian school. And I'm firm foundation. My wife is a high school Christian school English teacher, has taught for years in public education, the education for a child, and even a student as they get older in college. I highly recommend to do that. And one of the things that was mentioned then, and I've seen it over and over, and my own experience, I remember at Mankato State, and the professor there was so far left, she was off the charts, and she was talking, that was Ronald Reagan days, so that's a long time ago. And he was the president, and talking about all these things. I write things down, but there's a young, got out of the military, so he'd already been through school. He's a little older than most of the young mush minds that were there. And he said, no, that's not true, and that's not
Challenged
true.
her.
Yes, kind of like our speaker today a little bit, right?
Yep.
What is truth? And was a really good challenge for her, and it taught me a few things that way. It taught me, and I was just going, God called me later, and I went back to Christian education and finished my degree, as God called me to ministry as well. But we definitely see the importance and how it shapes you from your friends, from the teaching. You're not going to get what you got in chapel today anywhere on the campuses that aren't a strong, independent voice, or fundamental voice like we have here at Maranatha Baptist University.
Amen. Well, that's certainly the goal. I'm glad to be able to talk to parents whose kids have graduated, and who still look at that as a worthwhile investment. It is an investment.
Oh, absolutely.
Significant cost that I recognize and that we do our best to try and manage and help with. But to make that a priority and then to see the fruit of it, we're so proud of our graduates, like your kids, that are serving the Lord in whatever areas He calls them to do, and just trying to be faithful with the day-to-day. And I know that they're not always going to attend, the specific partnering churches that we talk to. They may not choose to apply the student handbook to the rest of their life, that's okay. We're still proud of them,
that's right.
And we're still very thankful for what God is doing. We recognize it as God's work in their lives.
Well, and the education my three oldest had here at Maranatha was bar none, one of the best, I think, in the nation. The quality of professors, the teachers, the music, all down the line, it impacts them, and so we're grateful for that.
Amen.
I look back at my own time at Pillsbury, or even at Central. When I went to seminary, I thought every Christian should be having to go to seminary. I mean, everyone. And then I realized, well, that's kind of the pastor's goal. But you should go every day.
Everybody should get this.
Now, you don't need the homework, but...
It's all right. We'll build more dorms. We'll accommodate. Right. Y'all can come. We'll make it work. Well, I appreciate that endorsement. And certainly the endorsement that means the most is just that your own children would come here. And as a father, that you would trust the institution with that. But also that you would be here as a guest today and join us and share the wisdom and experience with that too.
Can I say that we also have a few others in our endorsing agency whose children come to Maranatha. So I just met his son. I can't remember their names off the top of my head. All of a sudden, I'm drawing a blank.
I didn't put
and
you
I know
on the
them
spot.
well.
You put yourself on the spot for that one.
I did. I'm sorry. But so we've had several. Anyway.
I know when you're in ministry, it can be, you get exposed to a lot of different places.
Right.
And that Maranatha would be one that you would trust is a big deal. And we're thankful for you taking the time to be here this week and taking the time to be on the podcast.
My privilege, my honor, and thank you, Dr. Davis. I appreciate your time.
Well, have a great day. Thank you for listening to On Mission, a podcast produced by Maranatha Baptist University. Maranatha is different. In a world turned upside down, boldly standing for Christ certainly draws attention. Christian young people need godly mentors who will affirm their faith and build on the foundation laid by their parents and pastors. That is the Maranatha difference. While secular colleges seem devoted to destroying the faith of their students, MBU provides students with a nurturing environment to study, practice and grow their faith, and develop lifelong relationships with Christian friends. Maranatha can prepare you for whatever vocation God is calling you to pursue. Our academic programs are built upon the timeless foundation of God's Word and taught by loving faculty who invest personally in the lives of every student. Maranatha is different, and that's a good thing. Find out more at mbu.edu. And for information about our podcast guests and to listen to all the previous episodes, visit mbu.edu/podcast. Join us again next week as we examine what keeps leaders on mission.